They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl with a tender soul, crossing the border with blistered feet and a heart made of paper. She came alone, pregnant, barefoot, no name in the system, only a prayer hanging from her neck, stitched with cloth and sweat. In her backpack, a piece of dry bread, a faded photo of her mother, and a tiny cotton shirt, too small even for a newborn. The desert shows no mercy, but still, she walked. Each step tore her open. Each night, a whispered talk with God. She crossed the border under a moonless sky, her soul trembling harder than her body. The contractions began on the side of the road, but there was no one there, only wind and the silence of stones. When the baby came, there was no crying, no celebration, just the sound of a mother gasping for air and the world ignoring it all. She wrapped the boy in that little cotton shirt, made of thread and hope, then walked 3 more hours until she saw the white cross outside the church. There, on the doorstep, she laid him down, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much. She left a note, written with the last bit of strength in her hand. "Please save him, forgive me. I'll come back, I swear to God, I'll come back." Then she disappeared into the night, with a torn chest and a soul bleeding in silence. But in the courtroom, the judge didn't care about the desert, or the cross, or the note. She looked at that black girl with sunken eyes and shaking hands and said, "This is criminal abandonment." She didn't ask her name. She didn't ask her story. She just read the sentence, cold, quick, white. And like that, the mother was handcuffed. But there's something the court never saw, something that don't fit on paper or in law books. A promise, a silence, and a strength no one ever measured. Because this story was never meant to be pretty. It was meant to be told. If you've ever felt forgotten or punished just for trying to survive, stay here with me. The sky was heavy that morning, like it knew, like even heaven didn't want to watch. She sat on the cold metal bench, hands chained, belly still sore, eyes fixed on the concrete beneath her. They hadn't let her shower. Her dress was stained, her hair matted from sweat and dust, and the room smelled like bleach and old fear. She didn't speak, not because she couldn't, but because silence was the only thing that still belonged to her. They took her name, replaced it with a number. They took her voice, spoke for her in a language she barely understood. No translator, no comfort, just a public defender whose eyes never left his phone. He said her case was simple, open and shut, he mumbled. Didn't ask about the baby. Didn't ask why the soles of her feet were raw. Didn't ask about the blood crusted around her fingernails. To them, she was just another immigrant, illegal, disposable. The judge didn't look at her face, didn't look at her hands, only her skin, only her silence. "You abandoned a child," the judge said, "and ran." She wanted to scream, not in anger, in grief, because she had run, yes, but not from the baby. She ran from the men in uniform, from the flashlights, from the ones who didn't ask if she needed help, only where her papers were. The night she left him at the church, she heard them coming. Dogs, boots, yelling in English and guns in their belts. And so she ran, with milk still dripping from her body, with her own blood on her thighs. They caught her 12 miles away, in a ditch, shivering, whispering the baby's name to herself. They didn't care, didn't even ask why she had no shoes. All they saw was a body to cage. And now here she was, a mother without a child, a girl without a voice, a heart without a country. But even in that courtroom, even under those fluorescent lights, she didn't cry, because crying was something they could use against her too. And deep in her pocket, stitched into the lining of her dress, was a folded piece of paper. The second note, the one nobody had found, the one she wrote for the day she'd get him back. But before she could speak, before she could even unfold it, the judge leaned forward, took a long breath, and said something that made the whole room go silent. "You people always run from your responsibilities." And just like that, something cracked in the air, like the sound of a soul being broken. But that ain't the end. No, child, because someone else heard those words too. Someone sitting in the back row, holding her clipboard like a shield. And what she did next changed everything. She had soft eyes, the kind that used to believe in the system, the kind that still held on to mercy, even while surrounded by rules. Her name was Leanne, a social worker, tired, cautious, and used to staying quiet when the world turned cruel. But that day, when the judge's voice sliced through the air like a blade, something inside her shifted. You people always run from your responsibilities. The words hit Leanne like a slap, not just because they were cruel, but because they were rehearsed, practiced, thrown like stones from a place of power that had never known fear. She looked at the girl, no older than 20, wearing a stained dress and the look of someone who'd lost everything but refused to disappear. And for the first time in her career, Leanne stopped taking notes. She closed the file, not because the case was finished, but because she realized it had never really been opened. She had seen dozens like her, mothers with shackles on their wrists and fire still burning in their chests. But this one didn't look away. Her silence wasn't fear. It was sacred. It was a kind of prayer. And then Leanne noticed something, a small detail, almost invisible to everyone else. The girl kept touching her side, not her stomach, not her chains, but a stitch in the fabric, as if something was hidden there. Leanne leaned in, just slightly, heart pounding. And that's when she remembered there had been a note left with the baby. She'd read it herself, weeks ago. But it was different, shorter, desperate. This girl was still holding something back, not to deceive, but to protect. And suddenly Leanne knew that dress was hiding more than just pain. That courtroom wasn't a trial. It was a funeral, a quiet execution of a mother's dignity. But Leanne, she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She looked at the judge, then at the girl, then at the bailiff standing by the door, and she made a decision, not loud, not dramatic, just a whisper in her own heart. I won't let her fall alone. She stood up, cleared her throat, and began to speak. But before she could finish the first sentence, the judge slammed her gavel, once, twice, and what she said next froze even the bailiff where he stood. You are out of line, Miss Leanne, and if you say another word, you'll be held in contempt. But Leanne didn't sit down. She reached into her bag, pulled something out, and set it gently on the bench behind her. A recorder, still blinking red, and what it had captured would tear the silence wide open. It was a small machine, no bigger than her palm, covered in stickers, worn at the corners, like it had seen too much and been heard too little. Leanne had started recording her visits months ago, not out of rebellion, not out of anger, but out of fear that the truth was being erased. Not the kind of truth that fills out reports, but the kind that cries in corners, that bleeds between sentences, that hides in pauses and glances and things left unsaid. She had recorded testimonies, whispers, and sometimes just silence, because even silence has a sound when it comes from someone who's been hurt enough. That morning, before the courtroom doors opened, she'd left the recorder on, not to trap anyone, but to protect someone. What it caught wasn't just the judge's words. It was what came before, behind closed chambers, in a conversation not meant to reach ears like ours. Leanne hadn't planned to use it, but when she saw the girl in chains, heard the gavel crash against mercy, and felt her own shame choking her throat, she knew this couldn't stay hidden, because the tape didn't lie. It held the judge's voice, unmasked, unbothered, talking about quotas, about cleaning up the backlog, about teaching them a lesson so they don't all start thinking this country owes them something. It held a chuckle, sharp, cruel, and then the worst part, a pause. And the sentence that changed everything: we're not here to save their babies, we're here to stop them from having more. Leanne's hands trembled as she pressed play. The sound filled the small speaker, crackling, heavy, undeniable. The judge froze. The clerk stared at the floor. Even the bailiff's jaw clenched like he just remembered he had a conscience. But the girl, the mother, she didn't move. She just looked at Leanne, not with surprise, but with something deeper, recognition. Like she'd known all along that somewhere, someone had heard her. The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no applause, no shouting, just a stillness, deep, sacred, like the truth had finally spoken, and the walls didn't know how to hold it. But as the judge reached for the power switch to silence the tape, a second voice came through, small, young, breaking. "Mommy, please come back." The room gasped, because that voice wasn't on the original tape. And Leanne, she turned around, face pale, eyes wide, and whispered, "That wasn't from my recorder." Then, from the hallway, came the sound of tiny footsteps. The door creaked open, slow, like the whole world was holding its breath. And there he stood, small frame, barely walking, one hand holding the edge of the wall, the other clutching a cotton shirt, faded, torn, but still warm with memory. His eyes were wide, too wide for a child so young. Eyes that had seen too much before they even learned what safety meant. The silence in that room shifted from judgment to awe, from control to reckoning. No one moved. Not the guards, not the clerk, not even the judge, because something holy had just walked into the room. Leanne's lips parted, but no words came out, and the girl, the one they called criminal, she didn't cry. She couldn't. Her body forgot how a long time ago. But her knees gave out, slowly, gently, like a prayer falling to the ground. He walked toward her, step by trembling step, dragging that little cotton shirt behind him like a flag made of love. He stopped in front of her, looked into her face, reached out, tiny hand against her cheek, and then he whispered, not loud, not clear, just enough for her to hear, "You came back." Her chains rattled, not from fear, but from the force of her trying to rise, to hold him, to wrap him back inside the arms that once bled to bring him here. But the bailiff stepped forward, a hand on his holster, another reaching toward the child. That's when Leanne snapped, "Don't touch him." Her voice cracked like thunder in a room that had long forgotten what righteousness sounded like, but the judge stood, face flushed, hands shaking. "This child is evidence. He cannot—" And that's when the boy spoke again, louder this time, clear, strong. "I know her. She sang to me." A pause, heavy, like time itself had stopped to listen, and then the sound of chains hitting the floor, the girl's wrists free, because someone, somehow, had unlocked them. All eyes turned to the back, and there in the corner was a man in uniform, not ICE, not a cop, but a janitor, black, old, eyes full of fire, and he said with a voice that didn't shake, "Ain't no law stronger than a mother's song." But the judge wasn't done. No. She clenched her teeth, raised her gavel, and prepared to end it all. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that another voice had been listening, from another room, through another recording. And that voice had power, power enough to tear the truth wide open. He sat behind a pane of soundproof glass, a room above the courtroom where the important people watched without being seen, security feeds, courtroom mics. Every word, every gesture, every silence, recorded, processed, judged again. His name was Deputy Marshal Thomas, 23 years in service, never missed a day, never spoke out of turn. But today, he was sweating, because the audio feed in his earpiece was no longer just official business. It was confession, condemnation, and prophecy. He heard the judge's words, heard the child, heard the janitor. But what made his hand tremble was something else entirely, a voice from the girl, soft, like a lullaby buried in sorrow. And she was speaking now, not to the courtroom, not to the judge, but to her son. "They took you from my arms, but not from my soul. I never stopped singing to you even when my mouth was shut." Thomas leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. His fingers hovered above the comms button, because he remembered something. A policy change, buried in paperwork. Section 9, line 12. It said, If the safety or civil rights of a minor are under immediate threat, any officer with federal clearance may intervene. He'd written those words himself, years ago, when he still believed the law could protect the voiceless. But now, watching a child reach for his mother while a judge reached for punishment, he knew that line wasn't just ink on a page. It was a door, and it had to be opened. He grabbed the phone, dialed the emergency override. The courtroom lights flickered. The bailiff froze. The judge turned pale, and a voice came over the intercom, steady male southern drawl, but with the weight of command. "This court is now under federal review. Judge, step away from the bench." Gasps, murmurs, panic in white blouses and silver pins. But the girl, she didn't flinch. She just held her son, tighter than the world wanted her to. The judge refused, slammed her gavel again, eyes wild. "You can't override my courtroom." But she was wrong. Because power that hides behind fear can't stand in the face of truth. And Thomas, he had already sent the file, the recording, the transcript, the footage of the child, all of it, to someone who couldn't ignore it, someone who once wore robes too, and who knew what justice was supposed to feel like. But before the judge could be removed, before the mother could even breathe, the door opened again, and a woman walked in, carrying a box with a state seal. Inside it was something older than the courtroom, and more powerful than the judge. She walked with grace, not the kind that floats, but the kind carved from resistance. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a metronome of justice, sharp, measured, unbothered. She wore no badge, no weapon, only a blazer the color of deep earth, and a crucifix that rested over her heart like a wound that healed wrong. Her name was Miriam Cole, Special Counsel for Civil Rights, sent by the state, but raised in the church, raised by a woman who scrubbed hotel floors and taught her to pray with both hands open. She didn't nod to the judge, didn't flinch at the glares. She walked straight to the defense table, set the box down, and opened it. Inside, an old, cracked Bible, a blue folder, and a worn photograph of the girl as a child, smiling beside a woman with the same eyes and the same kind of silence. "This," Miriam said, "is her life." The courtroom shifted, a slow, uneasy wave crawling up the spines of those who thought they already knew this girl. But they didn't, because inside that blue folder was every piece of paper that never made it to the judge's desk. Birth records, church testimonies, letters from a shelter in El Paso, a nurse's affidavit from the night the baby was born, unsigned but honest, and a final document, stamped, dated, delayed. "She applied for asylum," Miriam continued, 2 weeks before she left the baby. The judge opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed something bitter, because what this meant was that the system failed first, not the girl. But it wasn't just paper that spoke. Miriam reached into the box and held up the Bible. Old leather, pages thinned by fingers desperate for hope. She turned to the girl. "Is this yours?" The mother nodded, slow, tears finally touching her cheek. "Yes, it's the only thing I had when I crossed." Miriam opened the front cover. Inside, a name, written in careful cursive, Maria Esperanza de León, and under that, a verse scribbled in Spanish. "Aunque camine por valle de sombra de muerte, no temeré. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The courtroom went still, not just quiet, still, because that name, Maria Esperanza, Mary Hope, was not the name on the court docket. They had called her Jane Doe. They had stripped her name, just like they'd stripped her voice. But now she had both back. The judge shifted in her seat, tried to regain control. These documents were not submitted through official, but before she could finish, the janitor, quiet until now, stepped forward again. He looked at the judge, then at Miriam, then at Maria, and he said, maybe they weren't submitted through the system, but they were submitted through the truth. A low murmur moved through the pews. People were standing now, softly, one by one, not shouting, just witnessing. And as Maria held her Bible, her son curled up beside her, head resting on her lap like it never left, the judge looked down, for the first time, ashamed. But Miriam wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice steady. "Your Honor, unless you want to be on the wrong side of a federal inquiry, I suggest you unseal the case file and let this woman go home." But home, that was the word that broke her. Because Maria had no home, no address, no country that claimed her, until now. Because inside that blue folder, tucked between the letters, was a sealed envelope from the church, and what it said would change everything. It was a plain envelope, no logo, no stamp, just a fingerprint in dust and a crucifix drawn in blue ink, shaky, like it came from a child's hand. Miriam opened it slow, careful, like it might bleed if rushed. Inside, one sheet of paper, folded twice, smelled of candle wax and old wood, like incense from a Tuesday vigil. Like pews that never forgot who sat in them, she cleared her throat, read aloud. "To whom it may concern. On the morning of April 3rd, a woman came to our church steps. She placed a newborn child wrapped in cloth at our door. She did not flee. She did not hide. She knelt and she prayed. I watched from the window. I saw her kiss his forehead. I saw her lips move, not in panic, but in promise. Then she walked away, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him more than her own freedom. We took in the child, called the authorities, and kept the note she left in our safe. I now return it to you, not as evidence, but as testimony. Signed, Sister Anne Maria Castillo, St. Jude's Mission Church, El Paso." Maria's hands covered her mouth. She was shaking. Because that note, the one she'd written with shaking fingers and a broken pencil stub on the back of a grocery receipt, it still lived. Miriam pulled it out. The ink was smudged, but the words were still there. "Please protect him. His name is Emmanuel. I love him more than my own life." The judge looked down at the letter, then at Maria, then at the boy curled in her lap. And still, she said nothing, because power like hers wasn't made for apology. It was made to be obeyed. But the room had changed. The air, the weight, what once belonged to her was now in the hands of truth. And then the door opened again, not loud, not fast, just enough to let the light in, and with it came Sister Anne herself, a small woman, wrinkled, brown as desert earth, carrying a small white bundle in her arms. She walked to the center of the room, placed it on the defense table, a blanket, the same one from that morning, still folded the way Maria left it. She looked at the judge, her voice soft but unmoving. "You may have the power to judge, but I held the child, and I know what love feels like." The courtroom swayed, not from sound, but from silence. The kind of silence that comes when heaven sits still and waits to see what humans will do. But the judge, she stood, reached for the gavel once more. "This hearing is adjourned until—" But she didn't finish, because Miriam stepped in front of her, eyes blazing, fury calm as a sea before storm. "You can't silence this, not anymore." And that's when the boy, Emmanuel, stood, tiny feet, shaky breath. He turned toward the judge, and with the innocence of a child who didn't know hate but knew love, he lifted the cotton shirt and held it out to her, didn't speak, didn't cry, just stood there, offering the thing that no law could replicate, mercy. And the judge, she backed away. But mercy doesn't let you run forever, because there was one more witness, someone who hadn't spoken yet, someone from inside the system. And what she carried in her hands wasn't just paper, it was proof. She had been there the whole time, third row, tucked behind the defense, a clipboard in her lap and a silence she wore like armor. Her name was Chloe Wynn, legal assistant, intern, white, 24, fresh from law school, full of dreams that had already started to rot inside rooms that smelled like old power and perfume. She had been told to observe, not to speak, to write down everything, but never ask why. But that morning, when Emmanuel offered his little shirt, when Sister Anne whispered truth into the cracks of the courtroom, When Maria knelt without chains and still looked like royalty, Chloe's hands began to shake, because deep inside her briefcase, under files she was told to ignore, was something she wasn't meant to keep. A transcript, signed, sealed, buried, the first asylum interview, the one where Maria told the truth, every detail. Every wound, every night in the desert, the contractions, the silence, the prayer at the church door. It was all there, stamped received, marked incomplete, due to staff error, filed, then forgotten. Or maybe not forgotten, maybe erased. She'd found it 3 weeks ago, stuck between copies of a parking citation and a campaign donation log. She'd asked her supervisor. He told her to shred it. "That girl's already going down," he said. "You don't rescue people like her. You process them." But Chloe, she didn't shred it. Something in her gut refused. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the Holy Ghost. Whatever it was, it made her rise now, stand, hands shaking. She walked past the clerk, past the prosecutor, past the bailiff who pretended not to see her. She stood in front of Miriam, in front of Maria, and held out the file. "I have her original claim, the one that went missing." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Miss Wynne, you are not authorized to—" "I know," Chloe interrupted, voice soft but steady. "But I can't stay silent anymore." She opened the folder, held up the page. There it was, in Maria's own handwriting, a section at the bottom, left in Spanish because her English had run out. "I am afraid to be here, but more afraid not to be. Please help me keep him safe. I will work, I will pray. I will never ask for more than a chance." The courtroom held its breath. And then Miriam turned to the judge. "That's 3 witnesses, 1 recording, a sworn affidavit, a federal override, and now the missing document you said didn't exist." But before the judge could respond, before she could gather the pieces of her crumbling authority, Emmanuel did something no one expected. He climbed up the bench. Tiny hands, tiny feet. He placed the cotton shirt on the judge's gavel and looked her in the eyes. Didn't blink, didn't smile, just said, "You dropped this." She didn't touch it. Couldn't, because in that moment, it wasn't a shirt anymore. It was judgment. It was memory. It was the weight of everything she'd tried to bury, but justice has a way of blooming through the cracks. And behind her, in the hallway just beyond the doors, the sound of footsteps, boots, but not the kind that chased. This time, they came with papers, with names, with orders, and one of them carried something even more powerful, a pardon. The boots stepped in, black leather, dusty, slow, like they had walked from somewhere far away, where truth still lived and justice wasn't afraid to wear old clothes. He wasn't young, wasn't loud, didn't need to be. He carried no weapon, just a folder, and a silence so heavy it made the judge sit back in her chair like the weight had finally reached her. The man's name was Deputy Alan Ricks, Office of Special Review, 4 decades in the field. He'd seen cages, he'd seen riots, he'd seen children die in rooms with no windows. But this case, this girl, this moment, it was different. He handed the folder to Miriam, gave a small nod, and stepped aside. She opened it slow. Inside, a single sheet, official seal, gold trim, signed by the governor herself, a full pardon. Issued not just for the charge of abandonment, but for entering the country without status. Language like fire, unapologetic, based on compelling evidence, eyewitness testimony, legal misconduct, and a miscarriage of moral duty. Maria Esperanza de Leon is hereby pardoned and protected from further prosecution under the full extent of state authority. The judge's lip trembled, but she said nothing. Because for once she had no words. But the paper didn't mean freedom yet. Miriam closed the folder, turned to Maria. "They're offering to release you, permanently, but there's a condition." Maria looked up, her eyes tired and tender. "What kind of condition?" "You can't stay here." The room stirred. Leanne stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Miriam's voice cracked, not with weakness but with sorrow. They're calling it a compassionate relocation, a quiet resolution. The state won't charge her, but they're offering transport to another sanctuary city, one with no ICE presence, one that won't ask questions. Chloe's breath caught, Leanne's hands clenched, and Maria, she just nodded, because she knew. Even in victory, some battles end with exile. "Can I take him?" she asked, voice soft, but full. "Yes," Miriam answered. "He's yours." The boy turned his head, eyes wide, heart open. He reached for her, like he'd done that morning at the church door, but this time he wasn't being left behind. She rose, no chains, no guards. She lifted him into her arms. And the whole room watched as she held him close, pressed her lips to his forehead, and whispered a name no court could erase. Emmanuel, God with us. But just as she stepped toward the exit, toward the van that would take her to a place without fences, a voice called out from the back, "Wait!" It was the janitor. He took off his hat, walked toward her, and placed something in her hand, a small wooden cross, carved by hand, rough at the edges. "You'll need this, not for faith, but for memory. Don't let this place make you forget who you are." She nodded, tears now, but soft ones, like rain after too many dry years. And as she turned to go, Emmanuel resting against her shoulder, his small fingers gripping the cotton shirt, the judge finally spoke, voice brittle, ashamed. I was wrong." Maria didn't turn around, didn't answer, because some things don't need forgiveness. They need rebuilding. But outside, as she stepped into the morning light, something waited for her. Something that would change the course of everything she thought she'd lost, because the story wasn't done. Not yet. There was still a letter, and it wasn't written by her. It was written to her. It was folded twice. No envelope, no stamp, just tucked into the seat of the van, waiting like it had always known she was coming. The driver didn't say a word, just nodded toward the back, a nod that said, "It's yours." She sat down, held Emmanuel close. The cotton shirt now tucked between them, a thread between what was and what might be. She opened the letter. The paper was soft, like it had been read a dozen times by hands that never stopped trembling. And the words, they weren't from the church, weren't from Leanne, weren't from the court. They were from someone who should have spoken years ago, someone who had spoken but never been heard, her mother. "Maria, mi hija, if you're reading this, it means you made it across. And if you're still carrying this, it means you didn't forget who you are. I was 16 when they told me to leave you. I didn't get to choose. I didn't get to stay. But I never stopped looking, never stopped praying. They called me an illegal too. They took my name, my hope, my rights, but they didn't take my love for you. I left this letter with the nun who took me in. She said God had his own way of delivering things. And maybe this is it. If you have a child now, hold him tight. Tell him the world tried to erase you both, but love wrote you back in. Forgive me if I wasn't there, but I have never left you. Not once." Mama Maria's breath caught. Her fingers trembled. Tears hit the page like holy water on something too sacred for words. She had spent her whole life thinking she was born in silence, raised by absence, shaped by nothingness. But now she saw the truth. Her silence was never emptiness. It was inheritance, passed down from one woman who survived to another who refused to disappear. She held Emmanuel closer and whispered, "You are not forgotten." The driver looked through the mirror, eyes soft. He'd seen it before, that moment when a soul starts putting itself back together. He reached into the glove box. This came too. Another note, small, ripped from a legal pad. It was from Leanne. "You don't know me, but I will never forget you. I spoke too late. I stayed quiet too long. But from now on, every case I touch, every child I see, every woman I meet with tired eyes and no voice, I will see you. I will speak, and I will fight." Maria folded both notes, tucked them inside the Bible, right between Psalm 23 and a piece of paper where she once scribbled Emmanuel's name 100 times, just to remind herself he was real. The van kept moving, miles passing, mountains in the distance, a new city waiting, a new name maybe, but not a new soul. Because she was still Maria Esperanza, and hope don't need documents to cross borders. But just as the van turned the corner, into the sun, toward a city that didn't yet know her story, the driver tapped the brakes, parked, turned to her. "I got one last thing." He reached behind the seat and handed her a package, wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. Inside it was something she thought she'd never see again. The original church surveillance footage, and in the corner of the screen, barely visible, hidden in the shadow of the doorframe, was a figure, watching, waiting. Her mother, still alive. The screen flickered, grainy, washed in that cold grey hue that makes even holiness look like surveillance. But it was there, undeniable, undeniably her, a figure standing just beyond the frame, in the early dawn of April 3rd, behind the stone pillar, near the cross. Not close enough to be seen, but close enough to never leave. She wasn't moving, not hiding, just witnessing. A woman in her 50s maybe, face thin, hair bound in a red scarf, and in her hands a rosary, the same kind Maria wore until the guards took it. It was as if time folded in on itself. Mother watching daughter, as daughter did what she once had to. They had both left babies behind, both prayed on church steps, both disappeared into systems built to forget them. But now, the footage made it real. Not just memory, not just pain, proof. The driver saw her face, watched it crumble and rise at the same time. "We got this last week," he said. An anonymous envelope, no return address, just the footage and one line. "Give this to her when she's free." Maria clutched the screen like it could bleed. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then Emmanuel looked at the image too, pointed. "Is that Abuelita?" She nodded. Didn't know how, didn't know why, but her body, it just knew. Yes, that's her. And suddenly, every silence made sense. Every unanswered prayer, every echo in the night where she thought no one was listening. Her mother had been there, at the church, at the door, watching her daughter become her. But why didn't she speak? Why didn't she come forward? Why disappear again? Questions now filled the van like incense in an empty chapel. But just as her thoughts began to spiral, Emmanuel tugged her sleeve. "Look, there's more." And there was. On the bottom corner of the screen, as Maria knelt with her baby and kissed his forehead goodbye, the woman behind the pillar lifted a hand, crossed herself. Then she placed something on the ground, a small cloth bundle, tied with red twine, and walked away. Miriam had missed it. The court missed it. Everyone did. But the camera didn't. And that bundle, it hadn't been there when Sister Anne found the boy, which meant someone else had taken it. Someone who had been following Maria, protecting from the shadows, keeping something safe. And now that someone had sent the footage, and one sentence burned itself into Maria's heart. "Give this to her when she's free." But there was no address, no number, no return name, just a symbol scratched on the envelope. A small drawing of a bird, wings open, body thin, paper trailing from its beak. And Maria, she remembered. A lullaby, half sung, half sobbed, from when she was too young to understand. "Volará por cielos de papel, hasta me encontrar." She will fly through skies of paper until she finds me. Maria closed her eyes. The desert, the detention center, the courtroom, the gavel, the chain. None of it broke her, because her mother had been guiding her all along. But now, a new question rose. If her mother was still out there, watching, why send the proof now? And why not come back herself? The answer was waiting at the next stop. Because across that city, inside a small apartment with no name on the mailbox, someone was lighting a candle, and someone was waiting for a knock that might never come. It was a one-room apartment, walls the color of faded prayers, a table made from scrap wood, legs uneven but still standing. In the window, a single candle, burning slow, steady, like it had been lit 1,000 nights before and never once lost hope. She sat by the light, still, wrapped in a shawl the color of dusk, hence folded in her lap, rosary swaying like a clock that no longer counted time. She didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't sleep much either, but every night at 7, she lit that flame and whispered the same thing. Señor, si la tienes en tus manos, devuélvemela en tu hora. Lord, if you're holding her in your hands, give her back to me in your time. Her name was Lucia. She had stopped using it years ago, took a job under a different one, mopped floors in silence, sent money with no return address, watched the news in Spanish, hoping to hear the name she gave her daughter, the name that had been stolen by systems and swallowed by courts. But she never stopped watching, never stopped listening, because when they made her leave that baby behind, they didn't take her soul, only her papers. She had followed Maria's story from whispers in shelters to names buried in court logs. She saw the case number, saw the headlines. Abandonment charge against undocumented mother. But she didn't scream, didn't call, because calling would have meant exposing herself, and the government don't forgive twice. So she did the only thing she could. She sent the footage and the note and prayed that God would carry the rest. But tonight, something was different. She stood, her bones creaked, not from age, but from years of carrying sorrow like a second skin. She walked to the wall, pulled a photo from the frame. The only one she'd ever kept, a baby girl, chubby cheeks, eyes full of fire, Maria. She kissed the corner of the photo, pressed it to her chest, and for the first time in decades, she whispered her name out loud. Mihija. Then came the knock, soft, once. Then again, she froze. No one knew this address. No one ever came. She stepped closer, bare feet against the tile, looked through the peephole, and her knees buckled. On the other side of the door, a young woman, eyes like hers, cheekbones sharp from hunger, but spirit unbroken, and in her arms, a boy, half asleep, wrapped in a cotton shirt she had folded 20 years ago for a baby she never got to raise. The door opened. No words, only breath, only tears. They looked at each other, two women, two halves of a story that no country wanted to read. And slowly, like the world itself was being rewound, Lucia reached out, touched Maria's face, then her heart, and whispered, "You came back to me." But Maria shook her head, held her tighter. "You never left me." Emmanuel stirred, opened his eyes, looked between them. "Is this Abuelita?" Lucia nodded. "Yes, mi amor, and I've been waiting for you longer than you've been alive." They sat together that night. No papers, no police, no fear, just hands that remembered and eyes that forgave. But as the candle flickered low, Lucia turned to the window, and her smile faded. Across the street, a black car, engine running, windows dark. Because the system wasn't finished yet, and mercy, child, mercy always comes with a price. The candle burned low, almost gone. Its flame danced like it knew it was being watched. Outside, the black car didn't move, didn't flash its lights, didn't send anyone to the door, but Lucia knew. And so did Maria. That kind of stillness don't belong to neighbors. That kind of silence ain't innocent. Inside, Emmanuel was asleep, curled up in a blanket older than he was, his breath soft, even. Lucia stood by the window, one hand on the curtain, the other gripping her rosary so tight her knuckles turned white. "They found me," she whispered. Maria didn't answer. She didn't have to, because her eyes said everything. "I just got you back. I'm not losing you again." But Lucia, she wasn't afraid. She had already lived through the worst. Once in a courtroom, once at a church door, and once in the moment they called her a criminal for giving her child a better chance at breathing. She turned to Maria. "I need you to listen." "No." Maria started, but Lucia raised a hand, gentle, firm. "This story doesn't end with me. It ends through me. I kept quiet too long. I won't let you do the same." She reached for a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, heavy, thick with history. Inside this are the names, the judge, the agents, The people who made the choices that nearly destroyed us both. Why would you keep that? Lucia's eyes burned now, not with hate, with clarity. Because I thought one day the world might want the truth, and if they didn't, maybe you would. She handed it to Maria, but Maria didn't take it. I don't want revenge. Lucia smiled, slow, proud. Then it's not revenge, it's record-keeping. She placed the envelope on the table, lit a second candle, took Emmanuel's tiny hand and kissed his fingers. You are the first man in our family born free. And then a knock, sharp, official, 3 times. Maria flinched. Lucia didn't. She stood, straightened her back, walked to the door like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. She opened it. 2 men in plain suits, no badges visible, but nothing about them was soft. Lucia de Leon? Yes. You're undocumented. You've been under observation. We have an order for removal. Maria stepped forward, voice shaking. She's my mother. She submitted asylum once. She has evidence. The taller one interrupted. That's not our jurisdiction. Lucia placed her hand on Maria's arm. No more running, no more hiding. She turned to Emmanuel. My boy, you hold the story now. Don't let them write over it. They cuffed her, gently even, like they knew this wasn't a criminal, just a woman the system forgot and was now trying to erase again. As they led her out, Maria shouted, not with anger but with truth. She was there. She saved him. She saved me. The shorter agent paused, looked her in the eyes, and said something strange. Then tell the world. Make sure they hear it. The door closed. The car drove off. The candle flickered, but Maria didn't scream, didn't beg. She sat at the table, opened the envelope, laid each page on the floor, one by one. She took Emmanuel's hand, placed it on the first page. This is our legacy. And then she did what the system never expected her to do. She picked up her phone, she pressed record, and she began to speak, because silence had been her prison. But now, her voice was her weapon. She sat by the window. Curtains pulled wide, not to let the world in, but to let herself out. The table was clean, the documents spread like wings. Emmanuel asleep beside her, his breath slow, safe now. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Her phone was still recording. No edits, no music, just truth wrapped in a mother's voice and carried by grace. They called me illegal, called my mother invisible, called my baby abandoned. But we are none of those things. We are not your fear. We are not your file numbers. We are not your shame to bury. We are the ones who made it through the desert, through the silence, through the lies. And we did not come here to steal. We came here to live. And now we speak. The video didn't go viral overnight, but it reached the right hearts. A church in Tucson, a library in Oakland, a classroom in the Bronx where girls with names like Yaritza, Sifa, Letitia saw themselves and didn't look away. Maria's voice, quiet, strong, undeniable, lit a fire that no judge could extinguish. The press came, the papers followed, and the system, slow, brittle, angry, was forced to blink. The charges disappeared. The judge resigned. The footage aired. But Lucia, she was still gone, held in a center no one wanted to name. No trial, no appeal, just dust and time. Until one morning, an envelope arrived, no return address, but a single line inside. Written in the same hand that once held a rosary and kissed a child goodbye. Volará por cielos de papel hasta me encontrar. She will fly through skies of paper until she finds me. Attached was a photo, a woman in detention, eyes tired, but unbroken, and on the back, a stamp from a country Maria had never known, because someone, somewhere, had filed a petition, and someone else had read her story, not on a legal form, not through a translator, but in her own voice. And finally, Lucia was granted release, not because the system had changed, but because the world was watching. Now, mother and daughter sit together, not always in the same room, sometimes across a phone line, sometimes across a border, but always in the same sky, a sky made not of borders, but of prayers, of paper, of memory. And Emmanuel, he knows the story. He tells it at school. He draws it in crayon. He wears the cotton shirt still, even though it's too small now. Because it's not clothing anymore. It's a flag, a story, a song, and every night as Maria tucks him in, she hums that lullaby. The same one whispered at the church door. The same one Lucia once sang before she was taken. Volará por cielos de papel. She will fly through skies of paper, and child, so will you. Pastor Elijah, soft, steady. They locked her behind bars, thinking that would silence her voice. But her story found another way to fly, through testimonies, through trembling hands, through screens and candles and cries that wouldn't go quiet, across deserts, through courtrooms, past the names they tried to bury her under, until it reached you. And if it touched something inside you, some old wound, some quiet ache, then don't let it end here. Let her story walk with you. Let her truth breathe through your voice, because some stories, they don't scream. They whisper until the whole world has no choice but to listen. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because silence has broken too many of us, and now it's our time to speak. Amen.